They called him broken when the IED took his legs. But what Marcus Steele was about to do in the next 60 seconds would shatter every assumption these elite soldiers had about what it means to be a warrior. Welcome to the Story Chronicles, where extraordinary courage meets impossible odds. The morning mist clung to Fort Meridian's championship shooting range like a shroud of anticipation. Coffee steam mingled with the breath of 43 active-duty soldiers, each one hand-picked from America's most elite units. This wasn't just another Tuesday training session. This was the apex competition, where Rangers, Delta Force, Marine Scout snipers, and Special Operations legends came to prove who truly owned the trigger. The atmosphere crackled with testosterone and barely contained arrogance. These warriors represented the pinnacle of human combat evolution. Their bodies were sculpted weapons, their minds laser-focused killing machines. They cleaned their rifles with the reverence of priests tending altars, adjusted scopes with the precision of surgeons, and exchanged war stories with the casual confidence of men who had stared death in the face and made it blink first. Then, the electric hum cut through their conversations like a blade through silk. Every head turned toward the parking area as a modified van with handicapped plates pulled up to the registration zone. The wheelchair lift descended with mechanical certainty, revealing a figure that seemed completely out of place among these apex predators. An elderly man in his 70s maneuvered a combat-grade wheelchair toward the sign-up table, his weathered flannel shirt and faded jeans a stark contrast to the sign-up table, contrast to the high-tech tactical gear surrounding him. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was the first to voice what everyone was thinking, his voice dripping with confused amusement. "Is that old-timer lost?" The Veterans Affairs Office is on the other side of base. Private Williams smirked, nudging his buddy. "Maybe he's here to watch his grandson get schooled by real operators." But Master Sergeant Thompson, a 22-year veteran with 3 Purple Hearts, noticed something the younger soldiers missed. The way the old man carried himself, even confined to that wheelchair, there was something unmistakably military about his bearing. Spine straight as a rifle barrel, shoulders squared as if he were still standing at attention, eyes that swept the environment with the automatic threat assessment of a predator who had never truly retired from the hunt. The wheelchair-bound visitor wore no unit patches, no rank insignia, no obvious indicators of military service. But his arms still showed the corded definition of someone who had never surrendered to his limitations. Most telling of all, he carried a rifle case across his lap with the casual familiarity of a man who had never been separated from his weapon for long. Sergeant First Class Martinez jogged over to the registration table where the elderly man was speaking in measured tones with Range Officer Captain Blake. Martinez couldn't hear the conversation, but he watched Blake's expression transform from polite confusion to stunned recognition to something approaching genuine fear. "Sir, I'm here to register for the Apex competition," the veteran said with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Captain Blake studied the military-dependent ID card the man had produced, then glanced at the registration form filled out in precise block letters. The name read, Marcus Steele, competing as authorized representative for deployed Sergeant First Class David Steele. Range qualification, expert marksman, specialty, sniper operations. "Sir, with all due respect," Blake began carefully, "this competition is extremely demanding. Most of our active duty participants train for months just to qualify." Marcus looked up with eyes that seemed to hold decades of classified secrets. "Captain, I've been training for this longer than most of these boys have been breathing." There was no boast in his voice, no ego, just the quiet certainty of a man who had earned the right to make such statements through methods that didn't appear on any public record. Word spread through the competition field faster than rifle fire. The old man in the wheelchair wanted to compete. The reactions ranged from barely concealed laughter to outright incredulity. "Gia, this is going to be painful to watch," muttered Corporal Jackson, a ranger fresh from his 4th deployment to Afghanistan. "Someone needs to save Grandpa from embarrassing himself." Private First Class Chen laughed loud enough to carry. "I almost feel bad. Poor guy probably hasn't touched a rifle since Vietnam ended. Even the more respectful soldiers shook their heads with sympathetic concern. They saw a disabled veteran trying to recapture glory days that were long dead, not understanding that time had passed him by like a bullet missing its target. But several of the older NCOs noticed details that made them deeply uncomfortable. The way Marcus handled his rifle case, not like a nostalgic relic, but like a familiar tool of his trade. The way his eyes automatically calculated wind patterns, evaluated firing positions, and assessed every tactical advantage the range offered. This wasn't the behavior of a hobbyist playing soldier. Sergeant Major Patterson, the most senior enlisted man on Fort Meridian, approached Marcus's position with the caution of a man who had learned to trust his instincts above all else. "Son," he said respectfully, "you absolutely certain about this? This isn't a charity event or a feel-good story. These operators are serious competitors who eat pressure for breakfast and spit out results." Marcus met Patterson's gaze with eyes that had seen more serious competitions than anyone present could imagine. "Sergeant Major, I appreciate your concern, but I didn't drive 8 hours across 3 states to sit in the bleachers." The competition format was brutally simple. 43 shooters would face 4 escalating stages of hell: 100-yard precision shooting to separate the pretenders from the contenders, 300-yard rapid engagement to identify who could think clearly under time pressure, 500-yard accuracy testing to eliminate everyone who couldn't consistently perform miracles, and finally, the 1,000-yard challenge that separated legends from everyone else who had ever held a rifle. As competitors moved to their assigned firing positions, Marcus wheeled his combat chair to lane 17. The soldiers flanking him, a Green Beret with 2 Bronze Stars with Valor and a Marine Scout sniper with confirmed kills across 3 war zones, exchanged meaningful glances over his head. Marcus opened his rifle case with movements so practiced they seemed choreographed. What emerged made several nearby operators stop their preparation routines and stare in recognition. This wasn't some vintage weapon from his service era. This was a custom-built precision instrument that looked like it had been engineered by NASA and blessed by the gods of warfare. Every component was state-of-the-art, clearly maintained with obsessive dedication that bordered on religious devotion. The Green Beret, Sergeant Davis, couldn't suppress his professional curiosity. "That's an absolutely beautiful weapon, sir. Mind sharing the specifications?" "Thank you," Marcus replied, beginning his pre-competition ritual. "She's been my partner through more operations than I care to remember." As Marcus assembled his rifle and conducted his equipment inspection, the mockery around him began shifting to uncomfortable silence. His movements were fluid, automatic, precise. This wasn't muscle memory from weekend hobby shooting. This was the kind of unconscious competence that only came from performing the same actions under life-or-death pressure thousands of times. The first stage commenced with 43 competitors assuming prone positions, each aiming at targets placed exactly 100 yards downrange. The objective was elegantly simple: 5 shots, tightest grouping wins. For elite military operators, this distance was essentially a warm-up drill. Marcus positioned his wheelchair at the designated firing line, engaged the wheel locks, and smoothly transitioned his rifle to a supported position using the range's adaptive mounting system. The transformation was startling. The elderly man in the wheelchair became something else entirely, a fusion of human intelligence and mechanical precision. "Shooters ready," Captain Blake announced, his voice carrying across the range with parade ground authority. Marcus's breathing slowed to the point where observers wondered if he had entered some form of meditation. His world contracted to include only the target, the crosshairs, and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Fire when ready. The range erupted in a carefully controlled symphony of disciplined violence. 43 precision rifles spoke nearly simultaneously, their reports echoing across the morning air like controlled thunder. Marcus's shots came at perfectly measured intervals, steady, unhurried, confident, each one placed with the deliberate certainty of a man who had never missed when it truly mattered. When the firing ceased, and targets were evaluated, an unnatural silence fell across the range. Marcus Steele's grouping measured 0.62 inches. The next closest competitor had managed 1.18 inches. "Jesus Christ," whispered Private Chen. All traces of her earlier amusement completely evaporated. "Quiet on the line," barked Sergeant Major Patterson, but even his voice carried a note of profound unease. The second stage was designed to separate soldiers who could think clearly under extreme pressure from those who merely possessed expensive equipment. 300 yards, 10 shots, 90 seconds. Most competitors struggled desperately to balance speed with accuracy at this extended distance, their groups opening up like flowers as time pressure mounted and precision decreased. Marcus approached the line with the same supernatural calm he had demonstrated at 100 yards. But now, every competitor was watching him with the intensity of students studying a master class in applied lethality. Corporal Jackson, the ranger who had joked about embarrassing Grandpa, found himself analyzing every detail of Marcus's technique. The old man's positioning was textbook perfect, but there was something else, an economy of motion that spoke of countless hours performing under conditions where second place meant death. Shooters ready. Marcus's hands moved to his rifle with movements so practiced they seemed to flow like water, finding its natural course. Fire. This time Marcus's rhythm changed completely. Faster, but still utterly controlled. His shots came in a pattern that seemed almost mechanical in its absolute consistency. While other shooters rushed their follow-up shots and struggled to reacquire their targets, Marcus fired with metronome precision that seemed to ignore the ticking clock entirely. When the smoke cleared and scores were calculated, Marcus had placed 10 shots into a group smaller than most competitors' 5-shot strings from the previous stage. Several soldiers stood motionless, staring at his target with expressions of complete disbelief. "That's mathematically impossible," muttered the Marine Scout sniper. "Not from a wheelchair, not at his age, not under time pressure." But Sergeant Major Patterson was beginning to understand exactly what they were witnessing. He had seen shooting like this exactly once before, during a classified demonstration by a man whose name appeared on no official roster and whose existence was neither confirmed nor denied by anyone with sufficient clearance to know the truth. As the remaining competitors advanced to the 500-yard stage, whispers began circulating through the range like a virus spreading through a closed population. Who was this old man? Where had he learned to shoot with inhuman precision? How was he making shots that defied everything they understood about human limitations? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez pulled out his phone and began searching frantically. Steele, Marcus Steele, former military sniper. His search results made the blood drain from his face completely. "Good God," he breathed, loud enough for nearby soldiers to hear clearly. "What did you find?" demanded Private Chen. Rodriguez turned his phone so others could see the screen. It displayed a heavily redacted military document from 12 years ago. The visible text read, "Operation Crosswind, target elimination, successful. Range, 2,847 yards. Operator, classified. Status, mission complete." Below that was a smaller, partially visible headline from a veteran's newspaper. "Legendary sniper survives roadside bomb, faces long recovery after losing both legs." But it was the final detail that made every soldier within reading distance feel their world shift fundamentally. At the bottom of the document, barely visible through the redaction bars, was a single word that made their blood turn to ice water. Ghost. By the time they reached the 500-yard stage, word had spread through the entire range like wildfire through dry grass. The disabled veteran wasn't some nostalgic old soldier trying to relive faded glory. He was Marcus Ghost Steele, holder of the longest confirmed kill in American military history, a legend who had supposedly disappeared from competitive shooting after losing his legs in his final classified operation. The mockery had transformed completely into something approaching religious reverence. Soldiers who had been joking about him 60 minutes ago now watched his every movement with the desperate intensity of apprentices studying a master whose techniques might mean the difference between returning home alive and returning home in a flag-draped box. Only 12 competitors remained for the 500-yard challenge. The targets were significantly smaller, the wind was increasing steadily, and the psychological pressure was mounting like water behind a dam. This was the distance where natural talent separated permanently from trained excellence, where pretenders were exposed and legends were born. Marcus took his position with the same otherworldly composure he had demonstrated throughout the morning. But now, when he settled behind his rifle, the entire range fell into absolute silence. Even the range officers found themselves unconsciously holding their breath. Shooters ready? Marcus's pre-shot routine was a masterpiece of controlled perfection. He read the wind flags with the casual expertise of a man who had learned to account for atmospheric conditions across distances that most people couldn't even see clearly. He made microscopic adjustments to his scope with movements so subtle they were barely visible. He settled into a firing position that united man, machine, and adaptive equipment into a single instrument of supernatural precision. Fire when ready. The first shot erupted from Marcus's position with controlled violence. Through the high-powered spotting scope, the range officer watched the bullet hole appear in the exact center of the target's 10 ring, placed with surgical precision that seemed to mock the laws of physics. 4 additional shots followed in perfect succession, each one placed with inhuman accuracy that defied everything the observers understood about the limitations of human performance under pressure. When scoring was completed, Marcus had achieved something that several range officers had to verify multiple times before they could accept the evidence of their own instruments. He had fired a perfect score, not just the highest score of the competition, but a mathematically perfect score that pushed the boundaries of what their measuring equipment could even detect. Only 7 competitors advanced to the final stage. 6 active duty soldiers representing the absolute peak of human combat capability, and 1 68-year-old veteran in a wheelchair who had just reminded everyone present why some legends refuse to die quietly. The 1,000-yard range represented Fort Meridian's ultimate proving ground, a testing environment where only the elite among the elite could function effectively. At this extreme distance, factors far beyond simple marksmanship came into play. Wind reading became an art form. Atmospheric pressure affected trajectory. The rotation of the Earth itself influenced bullet flight paths. This was the distance where science met art, where technology met instinct, where legends were separated permanently from everyone else who had ever claimed to be exceptional. As the final 7 competitors took their positions, Captain Blake found himself standing beside Marcus's firing lane, unable to resist asking the question that was consuming his curiosity. "Sir, may I ask how long you've been competing professionally?" Marcus looked up from his rifle preparation, his weathered face showing the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him all day. "Competing? About 43 years, Captain. But I've been shooting since I was 7 years old. My grandfather taught me on his tobacco farm in Tennessee, using bottles and cans as targets. Said a man who couldn't hit what he was aiming at wasn't much of a man at all." "And your military service, sir?" Marcus's expression became distant, as if he were seeing through time itself. 28 years active duty, 4 wars across 3 continents, more deployments than I care to count, most of them to places that don't appear on any public maps. His voice carried the weight of classified memories. "I lost my legs during my final operation, roadside bomb in a location I'm still not permitted to discuss. Doctors said I'd never compete again, never shoot professionally, probably never even walk." Captain Blake struggled to find appropriate words. "But you came back." Marcus's smile returned, but now it carried an edge that made Blake instinctively step backward. "Son, they took my legs. They didn't take my eyes, my hands, my mind, or my heart, and they sure as hell didn't take my training. A warrior doesn't stop being dangerous just because he can't walk. Sometimes he becomes more dangerous because he has nothing left to prove and everything to teach." The 1,000-yard stage required only one shot, a single opportunity to demonstrate that skill transcended age, disability, and the expectations of others. Marcus had drawn lane 4, positioned directly in the center of the firing line. To his left sat Sergeant Davis, the Green Beret who had admired his rifle. To his right was Master Sergeant Kim, a Marine Scout sniper with confirmed kills across multiple combat zones. Both men were 25 years younger than Marcus, in peak physical condition, armed with state-of-the-art equipment and supported by spotters with advanced range-finding technology. By every measurable standard, they should have held overwhelming advantages. But as Marcus began his final preparation routine, both men found themselves studying his technique instead of focusing on their own shots, like students desperate to learn from a master whose knowledge might never be available again. Marcus's routine at this distance was different from his previous stages, more deliberate, more ritualistic. He spent long minutes reading environmental conditions, checking and rechecking his equipment, making adjustments so microscopic they seemed to exist at the molecular level. This was preparation that spoke of experience earned through consequences far more serious than losing a competition. Shooters ready. The range achieved complete silence. Word had spread far beyond the original competitors now. Off-duty soldiers, range personnel, base commanders, even some senior officers had gathered to witness what was unfolding. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and barely controlled disbelief. Marcus settled behind his rifle with movements that seemed to exist outside normal time. His breathing slowed until observers wondered if he was still conscious. His finger found the trigger with the familiarity of a pianist, touching keys he had played for decades. The crosshairs centered on a target so distant it appeared as a tiny speck against the horizon. Marcus's world contracted completely. The crowd disappeared. The pressure evaporated. The competition ceased to exist. There was only the target, the crosshairs, the trigger, and the absolute stillness that comes in the moment before perfection is achieved. He fired. For several seconds after the shot, the world seemed suspended in crystalline silence. The crack of the rifle echoed across the range and faded into absolute quiet that felt almost sacred. Everyone present, competitors, range officers, spectators, base personnel, strained desperately to see the distant target. The range officer manning the spotting scope remained motionless for so long that Captain Blake began to fear something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Range officer, report target status immediately." The young soldier behind the scope didn't respond. He adjusted the focus mechanism, looked again, then slowly raised his head with an expression of complete psychological shock. "Sir, it's dead center, perfect 10 ring." A murmur ran through the crowd like electricity through water. "But sir," the range officer continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "the bullet went through the exact same hole as the previous competition's record holder. The same exact hole." The implications of what they had just witnessed began spreading through the crowd like a shock wave. The previous competition had been won by Fort Meridian's record holder with a shot measured at 0.08 inches from perfect center, close enough to mathematical perfection that it was considered unbeatable by human standards. Marcus Steele had just put his bullet through the identical location with precision that defied measurement. As the full weight of this achievement settled over the range, the atmosphere changed completely. The soldiers who had laughed when they saw him arrive in his wheelchair now stood in something that transcended respect and approached genuine awe. Sergeant Major Patterson was the first to approach Marcus's position, his voice carrying the reverence of a man who had just witnessed something that would be discussed in military circles for decades. "Sir, that was the finest piece of shooting I've witnessed in 32 years of military service." Marcus nodded his appreciation, but his attention had already shifted to his rifle, which he was beginning to clean with the same methodical precision he brought to every aspect of his craft. "Sir?" Private Chen stepped forward hesitantly, all traces of his earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. "Could I ask you something?" Marcus looked up from his cleaning routine. Go ahead, son. After your injury, how did you keep shooting? I mean, with the wheelchair and the physical limitations and everything? Marcus set down his cleaning rod and studied the young soldier with understanding that came from years of answering similar questions. Son, the military teaches you to adapt and overcome every obstacle. When you lose something, a limb, a teammate, a piece of yourself, you find new ways to complete the mission. The mission doesn't change just because your equipment does. He gestured toward his wheelchair. This isn't a limitation. It's just different equipment. I had to learn new techniques, new firing positions, new ways of thinking about the fundamental principles. But the core skills, breathing control, trigger discipline, environmental reading, mental focus, those don't require legs. Master Sergeant Kim, the Marine Scout sniper, approached with the humility of a student seeking wisdom from a master. Sir, I've been shooting competitively for 14 years. I've never seen anything approaching what you accomplished today. Would you be willing to share some professional advice? Marcus smiled. What do you want to know? Everything. How do you read wind conditions at extreme distances? How do you maintain that level of mental composure? How do you make it appear effortless? Marcus chuckled, a sound that carried decades of hard-earned wisdom. Son, it's never effortless. What you witnessed today was the result of thousands of hours of practice, hundreds of competitions, and more failures than I care to remember. But I learned something important over the years. He paused to secure his rifle in its protective case. Shooting isn't about equipment or physical condition or natural talent. It's about discipline. Discipline in your preparation, discipline in your technique, and absolute discipline in your mind. Marcus looked around at the soldiers gathered near his position, each one hanging on his words with desperate attention. Every person here has the physical capability to make the shots I made today. What separates good shooters from great shooters isn't strength or youth or expensive gear. It's the willingness to practice when you don't want to focus when it's difficult, and to keep improving even when everyone tells you your best days are finished. As Marcus prepared to depart, Captain Blake approached with a classified folder in his hands. Sir, I took the liberty of accessing your service record through appropriate channels. I hope you don't object. Marcus shrugged. Most of it's public record anyway, Captain. According to this, you hold the current American military record for longest confirmed elimination, 2,847 yards in Afghanistan, 2019. A hush fell over every soldier within hearing distance. 2,847 yards exceeded the capability of most military sniper systems. It represented shooting that belonged in the realm of legend rather than documented fact. Marcus nodded slowly. That was a different lifetime. Different rifle, different conditions, different mission parameters. But sir, Blake continued carefully, it also indicates that after your injury, you were approached by multiple civilian shooting organizations, professional teams, Olympic training programs. You declined every offer. I did. May I ask why? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of profound conviction. Because I didn't start shooting to become famous or win prizes or prove anything to anyone. I started shooting to serve my country and protect my fellow soldiers. When I couldn't do that anymore, competitive shooting felt meaningless. He gestured toward the soldiers surrounding him. But today was different. Today I got to shoot alongside the next generation of warriors. I got to demonstrate that excellence doesn't have an expiration date and that the mission continues even when the equipment changes. Marcus looked directly at Private Chen, who had asked about adaptation. And maybe I helped one young soldier understand that limitations are usually just opportunities to discover new strengths. As Marcus rolled toward the parking area, something extraordinary happened. Without any orders being given, the entire range formed into formation. 43 soldiers, from private to sergeant major, stood at perfect attention as the old veteran made his way to his modified van. Marcus stopped his wheelchair and looked back at the formation. For a moment, the years seemed to disappear from his face, and the soldiers could see the warrior he had always been, legs or no legs, young or old, active duty or retired. "Thank you," he said simply. "It was an honor to shoot with America's finest today." Sergeant Major Patterson stepped forward. "Sir, the honor was entirely ours. You reminded us of something critically important today." "What's that, Sergeant Major?" "That serving our country isn't something you stop doing when you retire. It's something you carry with you for the rest of your life, and something you pass on to those who come after you." Marcus smiled, rendered a perfect salute from his wheelchair, and departed for home. Long after Marcus Steele's van had disappeared beyond the base gates, the soldiers remained on the range, discussing in hushed, reverent tones what they had witnessed. Private Chen found himself standing beside Sergeant Davis, the Green Beret who had competed in the lane next to Marcus. "Sergeant," Chen asked quietly, "how did he do it? How did he shoot like that from a wheelchair?" Davis shook his head slowly. "Kid, you're asking the wrong question entirely." "What do you mean?" "The question isn't how he shot like that from a wheelchair. The question is how any of us were stupid enough to think a wheelchair would slow down a man like that." Davis looked toward the 1,000-yard target where Marcus's perfect shot was still visible through the spotting scope. "Some people become soldiers because it's a job. Others are born warriors. Marcus Steele is the kind of warrior who doesn't stop being lethal just because he can't walk. Hell, he might be even more focused now. He's got nothing left to prove and everything to teach." In the months following Marcus Steele's visit to Fort Meridian, his demonstration became the stuff of military legend. The story spread through veteran organizations, shooting communities, and classified networks across multiple continents. But the real impact was quieter and more profound. Chen, inspired by Marcus's example, began volunteering at the regional VA hospital, helping disabled veterans develop adaptive shooting techniques. Davis started a mentorship program pairing experienced operators with wounded warriors transitioning to civilian life. Captain Blake submitted recommendations that led to Marcus being invited as a guest instructor at the Army Marksmanship Unit, where he now teaches advanced precision techniques to America's elite marksmen. And every month, when Fort Meridian holds its apex competition, competitors observe a moment of silence at the 1,000-yard line, not in mourning, but in recognition of the lesson Marcus Steele taught them all. That excellence has no expiration date, that limitations exist primarily in the mind, that sometimes the most powerful shot you can take is the one that proves everyone wrong about what's possible. Marcus Steele never intended to become an inspiration. He simply wanted to compete, to test skills he had spent a lifetime perfecting, and to prove to himself that losing his legs didn't mean losing his identity as a warrior. But in doing so, he reminded everyone who witnessed his shooting that day of a fundamental truth about the human spirit. We are never defined by what we've lost, but always by what we choose to do with what remains. The soldiers who laughed when they saw him arrive in his wheelchair learned something that no amount of training could have taught them. They learned that respect isn't earned through youth or strength or perfect health. It's earned through dedication, skill, and the courage to keep fighting long after others would have surrendered. Marcus Steele earned their respect the only way that truly matters, one perfect shot at a time. Welcome to the Story Chronicles, where we celebrate the extraordinary courage that lives within ordinary people. If this story moved you, subscribe to discover more incredible tales of human resilience, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What limitations have you overcome in your own life?